Ryan Reynolds was at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, seated comfortably for what seemed like an ordinary dinner. But what happened next completely shattered that illusion. The waiter, acting with an unexpected level of disrespect, mocked him, loud enough for everyone to hear. No one could have predicted what came after. Instead of a fiery comeback, a typical celebrity response, Ryan simply paused. The room waited. And then, he responded in a way that turned the entire situation on its head. It wasn't what anyone expected. You're going to want to stick around to see how Ryan handled that moment. Because how he turned an awkward insult into something entirely different could change how you think about responding to those uncomfortable situations in your own life. Before we get started, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It's a story you'll want to pass on. Ryan Reynolds wasn't just grabbing dinner at any ordinary spot. This was one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, the kind that draws in the rich and famous. Every inch of the place screamed luxury, from the carefully curated menu to the elegant ambience. It was the perfect setting for someone like Ryan, who, despite his celebrity, wasn't looking for anything more than a peaceful evening out. But then, something happened that no one could have predicted. A waiter, a regular face at the restaurant, approached Ryan's table. What should have been a routine interaction turned uncomfortable fast. Instead of a warm greeting or courteous service, the waiter's words came off as pointed, a mockery that made the air feel heavy. The room fell silent. Most of us would have been caught off guard, maybe even a little angry, but Ryan stayed still, his expression unreadable. The tension in the air was thick, and everyone was bracing for his response. What would he do? Lash out? Shrug it off? Then, to everyone's surprise, Ryan did something different. He didn't react in the way most people would have expected. Instead of fueling the fire, he paused. The way he responded wasn't about getting the last word, but about setting the tone. He wasn't backing down, but he wasn't escalating things either. The moment changed in a split second. You could almost feel the room shift. What Ryan did wasn't some grand gesture or a flashy comeback. It was just a quiet, confident response that spoke louder than any words could have. How do you handle situations where you're tested, when the pressure's on and all eyes are on you? Do you react, or do you take a step back and let the moment pass? Ryan's choice wasn't just about standing up to a challenge, it was about choosing how to face it, and sometimes, that's the most powerful thing we can do. How do you think you would have handled it? Let me know in the comments. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. Ryan was enjoying his evening, quiet, relaxed, with the ambience of a top-tier restaurant surrounding him. There were no signs that anything would interrupt the calm. But then, the waiter approached the table. This wasn't your usual server. You know the type, the ones who greet you with a smile, offering suggestions, and making you feel comfortable. No, this waiter carried an air of superiority. His tone wasn't quite right. It was polite on the surface, but there was something underlying it, something that didn't sit well. Ryan, ever the keen observer, caught it immediately. It started small, just a veiled remark here, a dismissive glance there. Nothing overtly offensive at first, but it was enough to make anyone uncomfortable. A slight jab about Ryan's food choices, a comment that seemed too pointed to be a mistake. And yet, the waiter's smirk was barely noticeable, just a hint, as if he thought he was being clever. Ryan didn't react. He sat there, calm, giving nothing away. But the atmosphere? It was changing. You could feel the shift. The quiet chatter around them faded as more eyes turned to see what would happen. Ryan remained composed, but the tension was palpable. You could sense it building, like a storm slowly gathering strength. What would he do? Would he challenge the waiter, call him out? Most people would have, right? But instead, Ryan just stared back, unflinching. The silence was thick enough to make the slightest gesture seem like an accusation. How often do we find ourselves in situations where we have to decide how much of a reaction is really necessary? It's easy to feel the urge to defend ourselves, especially when we're confronted with disrespect. But Ryan, in that moment, wasn't just avoiding confrontation, he was waiting. Waiting for the right moment to turn this around, without throwing fuel on the fire. And when that moment came, his reaction wasn't one anyone could have predicted. Have you ever been in a situation like this? When you could feel the tension rising, but you knew reacting might only make things worse. How do you deal with it when the pressure's on? Then, just when it seemed like the tension couldn't get any thicker, the waiter crossed the line. He leaned in slightly, a grin on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. And in a tone that was too casual, too knowing, he made a comment about Ryan's recent film roles. A joke, he must have thought. Just a harmless quip. But Ryan's smile faded. What the waiter saw as a light-hearted remark about Ryan's career was anything but that. It was a jab, a subtle insult that cut deeper than most would realize. On the surface, it was disguised as casual humor, but anyone who'd been paying attention could see it for what it really was, a snide comment meant to put Ryan down, to belittle him. A comment no one in that room had asked for, least of all Ryan. The atmosphere shifted again. The once muted conversations around the room became quieter as other patrons began to notice the exchange. There were whispers, glances passed between people who felt the discomfort in the air. Was Ryan going to say something? How would he react? Everyone had their eyes on him. And still, Ryan didn't react. His calmness almost felt too deliberate now, as if he were waiting. Waiting for the right moment, or maybe just waiting for the waiter to realize what he'd done. The power was shifting, and though the waiter didn't know it yet, he had just made a mistake. It was a delicate balance. Ryan didn't want to escalate things, but the line had been crossed. What do you do when someone pushes you too far, when they take a joke and turn it into something personal? How do you keep your composure when everything in you wants to respond? The thing is, we've all been there, right? Faced with that moment where someone tries to make us feel small, tries to knock us down. It's easy to fight back, to go on the defensive. But sometimes, the more powerful choice is to stay silent until the moment when speaking is the only thing that matters. How do you respond in those situations? Do you speak up, or do you stay quiet and let the moment pass? But here's the twist, Ryan didn't lash out. He didn't raise his voice or create a scene. It's easy to imagine how someone might react in that moment, especially in front of an audience. The temptation to snap back, to get even, is so strong. But Ryan didn't take the bait. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. He leaned back in his chair, a calm smile crossing his face, and with perfect poise, he said, "I'm not sure if you're joking, or if I just need a better taste in waiters. Either way, I'm impressed at how you've managed to insult me without actually trying." A beat of silence followed. The room seemed to freeze for just a second. Everyone had been waiting for the tension to break. They expected fireworks, anger, frustration, maybe even a public confrontation. But Ryan? He turned the situation into something entirely different. His response didn't just diffuse the tension, it shifted the entire energy in the room. The waiter, clearly unprepared for such a response, faltered. His confident posture crumbled in an instant. He had no comeback. He stood there, looking almost lost for words, his own arrogance suddenly leaving him. It was a powerful moment, one where Ryan had flipped the script. Without a single raised voice, without a harsh word, he'd taken control of the entire situation. He hadn't let the insult land. Instead, he had turned it into something light and even humorous, something the waiter never saw coming. Have you ever been in a situation where the tension was unbearable and everyone expected you to lose your cool? What did you do? Did you give in to the pressure, or did you find a way to handle it with grace? Ryan's response wasn't about ignoring the insult, it was about responding in a way that completely disarmed the person who tried to provoke him. What's your takeaway from this moment? How do you handle pressure when someone tries to get under your skin? Do you let them win, or do you show them the strength of your calm? The waiter stood there, completely stunned. He had no response. The room went quiet for a moment, everyone waiting to see how he would react. But before he could find the right words, the sound of laughter began to rise. It wasn't forced or awkward, it was genuine. The other diners had caught the energy of the moment. The tension that had been hanging in the air just a second ago had completely shifted. Then, Ryan, with that trademark wit of his, casually added, "I'll take the steak medium rare, but for you, I think an apology is well done." And just like that, boom. The room erupted. Everyone was in stitches. Even the waiter knew he had lost the battle. The entire restaurant was united in that moment of humor, and Ryan had handled the situation with such finesse that no one could help but admire him more. Ryan didn't just win that exchange, he turned it into a masterclass in how to diffuse tension. With humor, with grace, and yes, with just a hint of humility, he earned the respect of everyone around him. Think about it, how often do we let ourselves get caught up in anger or frustration when faced with disrespect? Ryan's response wasn't about showing up the waiter, it was about knowing how to keep control of the moment. Sometimes, the best response isn't a harsh comeback, but one that disarms the situation entirely. As the night stretched on, something shifted. The waiter, who had started off so arrogantly, seemed to change his tune. He started to offer more courteous service, nodding politely and even throwing in a few small, genuine apologies. It was clear he had learned something, maybe not from a lesson he expected, but from one that hit close to home, humility. And Ryan? He didn't dwell on it. He didn't make a scene or hold a grudge. He just kept being himself, effortlessly charming. Ryan wasn't out to show the waiter up. This wasn't about winning some kind of verbal duel. No, Ryan was teaching something more profound, respect. He showed that sometimes the most powerful way to respond to someone's disrespect isn't by getting loud or defensive. Instead, it's about handling the moment with grace, humor, and a little bit of cleverness. With a smile, he turned the situation around, leaving the waiter and everyone around him with a lesson that went beyond words. And of course, Ryan kept the mood light. Despite everything that had gone down earlier, the dinner continued without a hitch. His laughter was infectious, and his ability to make light of a tense situation made everyone around him feel at ease. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about being real, and Ryan, as always, was the epitome of that balance. Isn't it amazing how a single moment, a few well-chosen words, can shift an entire atmosphere? Ryan didn't need to raise his voice to prove a point. Sometimes, the most powerful response is the one that leaves people reflecting on their own actions. What do you think? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you could have handled it differently, but chose to stay calm and composed instead? Drop your thoughts in the comments, we'd love to hear your perspective. By the end of the night, Ryan Reynolds had done more than just salvage a tough situation, he turned it into a moment of real clarity. Instead of letting the tension ruin his evening, he showed us all how to rise above the small stuff. By responding with wit, charm, and a touch of humility, he not only handled the insult, he made it a lesson for everyone watching. The truth is, it's not always about having the last word. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is maintain your composure and demonstrate that you're above the pettiness. Ryan didn't let the waiter's attitude dictate his mood. He simply showed up with his best self, leaving the drama behind. So, what would you have done in that moment? Would you have let the waiter's comment slide, or would you have confronted him? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think you would have handled the situation? If you enjoyed this story, and want to hear more unbelievable moments that make you think, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for sticking with me through this one.